Hey, good morning, everybody. This is Anthony Gliffe. I'm just going to give it maybe 1 or 2 more minutes to get going before we get going here to see if anybody else wants to hop in before I start. So just hang tight, and then I'll officially get going and share my screen in a couple minutes. Thank you. All right, we're going to get going. Taylor, if that's okay, we're gonna get moving here. Good morning, everybody. My name is Anthony Gliffe. I excited to be here this morning and share my presentation on advising college-bound student athletes. First, I want to thank you guys for attending this and hearing this out. This is a very unique and different presentation, and I'm going to bring up some things and look at the whole process a little differently from a different lens. So, if you guys can have an open mind, I'd really appreciate that. As far as questions go, if you guys want to put your questions in the chat and we can save those until the end. My presentation isn't going to take the whole time, but definitely want to save some room for questions at the end. And I'll stay on as long as I need to in order to make sure you guys get your questions answered. I'll share my contact info at the end as well. If you guys would like a copy of any of my resources or the presentation itself. But before we get in, let me just give you a little bit of background about myself. Like I said, my name is Anthony Gliffe. Currently, I am a college career pathway specialist at the Technology Center of Dupage in Addison, Illinois. So it's just outside of Chicago. So I specifically help high school students with dual credit with some of our partnering community colleges, and then helping them earn certifications in career and technical programs that we have. But my background and my experience and kind of my side hustle has been helping college student athletes, and then obviously working with school counselors, student athletes, families, athletic directors, high school coaches on advising and supporting college-bound student athletes. So to give you, like I said, a background, I am from the Chicagoland area, signed a national letter of intent, played Division II baseball at Quincy University. I have my undergrad in special education, my master's in school counseling. And then after my internship, I had the opportunity to be an athletic academic advisor / learning specialist at the University of Illinois, Chicago, and then switched over to Division II at Lewis University, which is a part of the Great Lakes Valley Conference. There, I was an athletic academic advisor for over 450 student athletes who can come and see me for anything related to academics, career, social, emotional. I would track their progress towards degree and their academic eligibility every semester. Then got into the high school level where I'm at now. I've been a coach in high school for 9 years at all 3 levels within baseball. I've done 18U travel. And then as a part-time thing, I'm a director of college recruitment and development for Lake County Lightning and Illinois Lightning, which is a travel baseball organization just outside of Chicago up north. So I really have a unique perspective on supporting college-bound student athletes as well as college athletes. This presentation I've had the opportunity to present at LSU before when this conference was in person a couple years ago. So I want to thank LSU for giving me the opportunity again. And I've presented this at the state, regional, and national level, and I'm an active member of N4A. So like I said, my presentation is going to go through a refresher of the NCAA, NAIA, just some talking points from an academic side of things. And then I'm going to get into like the unique decision-making model that I work with student athletes and families on from an athletic side of things, and then talk about some additional supports that what we can do to support college-bound student athletes. So like I said, I hope you guys really go into this with an open mind and appreciate the different lens or the different insight that I'll provide throughout this presentation. So thank you guys once again, and then I will get going. I'm going to share my screen in a second. I'm just going to hop right into it, and then just save any questions you have until the end. I'll be glad to stay on. Thank you guys again. All right, so here is my presentation, Advising the College-Bound Student Athlete. So the first thing that I get into that I talk about with student athletes is they have traditional choices to make. So regardless if they're a student athlete, juniors and seniors in high school are all going to have to make traditional choices regarding college and what they want to do next after high school. Athletes have additional things that they need to consider, but I'm going to get into those a little bit later. So here are some of the traditional choices that all students in high school are going to have to consider, right? So whether they want to commute or live on campus, location, 4-year versus 2-year, small, medium, or big school, the type of college, the majors or academic programs they have, the cost, the job outlook, the graduate school. So like I said, these are all things that, in my opinion, every junior or senior in high school has to consider. And then if you're a student athlete, there are additional things that they need to consider that I'm going to get into. However, before I get into that, the uniqueness of that, definitely want to touch on a refresher with the NCAA and NAIA eligibility centers. So I'm going to switch over to that and then show you guys some cool resources that I got to create during my school counseling internship. So one of the big things is student athletes need to register with the NCAA Eligibility Center if they plan on competing at the NCAA Division I or II level. Typically happens during their sophomore or junior year. They need to meet eligibility requirements through years of approved coursework and test scores. So the unique thing is the NCAA high school portal will actually list every high school in the country and the schools, and the courses that are approved throughout the different subjects. So what I tell when I share with a lot of school counselors, a lot of student athletes and their families, really important to have that list and to make sure that the classes that they're taking are showing up on that list that are NCAA approved, okay? Student athletes in collaboration with their counselors should begin planning at the start of their freshman year following the approved course list of your high school. Student athletes can send their test scores directly to the NCAA Eligibility Center. Counselors follow up with uploading transcripts to the NCAA Eligibility Center, and then Division III student athletes follow the admission requirements set by the institution. So if you have a student athlete that's going Division III, they do not need to worry about the Eligibility Center. Now, this is a question that I typically get a lot is, what if a student athlete or their family, or you as a school counselor or an administrator or a stakeholder in your work with student athletes, what if they're not sure what level they're at? So the NCAA Eligibility Center does have a free profile page that student athletes can create kind of while they're in a holding pattern to figure out what caliber division they are. However, to actually register at the NCAA Eligibility Center typically is $90. So I'd hate for parents or athletes to dish out that money and then they end up not getting recruited or signing with a Division I or II school. So that's just something I think you want to make the student athletes and families aware of in this process, is kind of gauging where they're at and whether it's worth it to spend that money or if it's just in the meantime more appropriate to create that free profile page. At the bottom, I talked about scholarships by division. So Division I and II can offer athletic money. Division III does not. Junior colleges or community colleges that are Division I can offer athletic money, and that can come in the form of tuition or books, or in some cases even housing if those community colleges do have housing. I know Division II does offer athletic money as well. I think those are just more or less in tuition or books, not so much housing. And then any community college or JUCO that's Division III does not offer athletic money. So here I wanted to dive in just into the Division I and II core classes and just kind of interpreting that test score, that grading scale, that sliding scale, and all that good stuff. So the one thing I keep in mind when I talk with student athletes and families is the NCAA core course requirements are separate of their high school's graduation requirements, and it's separate of being admitted into the school. So a lot of student athletes and families think that this is all a package deal, and it's not. They have to meet those requirements and those separate. They have to meet each of those tasks separately. Okay. So what they're going to do here is the NCAA is going to take these core courses, English, math, a science, a social science, and then any additional courses, which is typically foreign language. They're going to take the student athlete's grades and they're going to formulate a core GPA. Then that core GPA has to match a test score. So for Division I, you need 4 years of English, 3 years of a math, 2 years of a physical, natural science, 1 additional year of anything that I mentioned to the left, 2 years of a social science, and then four additional years of anything I mentioned to the left, plus a foreign language. And then what's going to happen with that is we're going to slide over to the grading scale. They're going to formulate a core GPA. Now, I know this scale can look overwhelming, but the reality is it's pretty easy to interpret. The higher the core GPA, the lower the test score you need. The lower your core GPA, the higher the test score you need. So for example, if we're going to utilize, let's say you have a student athlete that's a 3.3 core GPA. When it says the new SAT, that means they have to get a 550 or higher between both the reading and math sections of the SAT. So they have to get higher than a 550. When it says the ACT sum is 44, that is adding all the subsections of the ACT, and it has to be higher than that. Okay, so that's pretty self-explanatory. So then we'll switch to Division II. Let me just get out of here. Let me go down to Division II. So I'm not going to get into the grading scale with D2 because it's very much similar. Higher your core GPA, the lower the test score you need, and vice versa. But you're going to see that the years are very different. So you're going to need 3 years of English, 2 years of a math, 2 years of a natural physical science, 3 additional years of anything that I just mentioned to the left, 2 years of a social science, 4 years of additional courses that I mentioned to the left, plus a foreign language. So I just want to reiterate once again, right? The NCAA Eligibility Center is separate of meeting their high school requirements, and it's separate of being admitted to the school, okay? Now, here's a couple of cool tools that I created. I know it's a little old school, but it's through a Google Doc, and I'd be willing to share this with you guys. But I actually did this during my school counseling internship, and you'll see the logo on there. But I actually created a core course tracker for Division I and Division II, and it can be used as a Google Doc. You can print it out, you can type into it, you can write into it. But I thought this would be a really good tool to have with the student athlete and the counselor to track their core courses throughout their 4 years. And it's pretty straightforward. Once you fill up the whole box, the chart, and meet the appropriate amount of years, you know from a year standpoint that they're going to be okay. So I created a Division I and a Division II one. And I got to tell you, I've done this presentation quite a bit in Illinois, especially for our Illinois School Counselors Association. And a lot of counselors have found this valuable, and a lot of them ask for copies of that. So I'd be willing to share this resource with anybody that feels this is appropriate within the scope of their work, okay? So next we're going to talk a little bit about NAIAs. So, you know, for just to give a little background on NAIs, I didn't know much about them going through high school or college, but I actually gained an appreciation for them as I played summer baseball around the country. I actually was lucky enough to play summer ball in Kentucky and Tennessee and played with a lot of guys who competed at the NAI level. And I think, in my personal point of view, NAIs are really region-based across the country. I think there's parts of the country that have exceptional NAI programs and experiences. And I think there's part of the country where there's NAI schools that don't have that rich experience or that great athletic experience or success. As far as NAIs go, they do offer athletic money. That also varies between the programs. So there might be some programs that have their full amount of scholarships, and there's some that might not be. Typically, what I've seen with NAIs is there's a very strict religious aspect to their campus life and to the structure of their school, and that could be appealing to some families, and it might not be appealing to others. So that is definitely another opportunity. NAI themselves have their own eligibility center, and student athletes do need to register with the NAI eligibility center. And then student athletes need to meet 2 of the 3 requirements. They need to have a minimum GPA of 2.0 or higher, or graduate in the top half of their high school class, or get an 18 or higher on the ACT, or a 970 or higher on the SAT. Student athletes can send their test scores directly to NAI, and counselors can send transcripts through their high school portal. Transcripts sent this way are considered official. So I know one of the things that have come up specifically for student athletes who are seniors this year, who are maybe looking at the eligibility center, both NAI and NCAA. I know they have made exceptions for their test, specifically for student athletes, the testing requirement. I know they've made an exception for student athletes who are entering in the fall of next year, where I believe they are waiving that, and they are just looking to making sure that you have the GPA and the amount of years of core classes. But that's definitely something that you're going to want to continue to follow, because I think once things return back to normal, or whatever the new normal is with this pandemic, I think you're probably going to see them go back to that testing requirement. So just keep that in mind as far as moving forward when working with your student athletes, especially who are juniors or sophomores or freshmen. So that kind of highlights my academic side of things. So now we're going to get into kind of the nitty gritty, the uniqueness of my presentation. It's going to help student athletes gain autonomy. It's going to empower them to help them make their own decisions and help them evaluate what schools to reach out to. And it's also going to help them evaluate what schools that might be recruiting them already. So when I meet with student athletes and their families, or just the student athletes, there's like 4 essential questions that I start out with asking. And this is where I'm trying to change the conversation that athletic directors, coaches, high school administrators, school counselors have with their student athletes. I think what I'm trying to do is create a more rich, meaningful, dynamic conversation with that student athlete, and instead of at least from my experiences, what I've seen having worked at multiple high schools in the Chicagoland area, where that athlete comes in, they want to play in college, and the counselor just says, okay, well, make sure you register with the eligibility center. The conversation needs to be more than that. I think it needs to be more dynamic than that. So this is the 4 questions that I essentially start out with. So the first one is, what are you looking to major in? Obviously, it's very important that the student athletes, when they're researching and identifying schools, that they have the major that they want. However, I will say this: it is okay if student athletes go into college undecided. So part of my role at Lewis that I worked at as the athletic advisor was being in charge of the undecided student athletes. And student athletes have the first 2 years, first 4 semesters to figure out what they want to do and eventually declare a degree by the start of their junior year or the start of their 5th semester. So I know there's kind of, at least up by me, I don't know if it's across the country, there is a stigma around being undecided going into college. And I want to let you guys know that it's completely okay. At that point, when I would work with student athletes who were undecided, my whole goal was to have a continuous conversation, and a conversation that would evolve around what they eventually want to do, and start to get them into some of those introductory courses in certain majors that they would be potentially interested in, because that'd be a great way of seeing, hey, maybe that's direction they want to go in. If it doesn't, it's okay. It didn't hurt them. Sometimes it would count as a gen ed or an elective. So I just wanted to make that distinction there, because I know we're always constantly talking about major, but it is okay if student athletes come in undecided as well. Next question is very important. What athletic experience do you want? Do you want to play right away? Do you not mind sitting a couple years, or do you just want to be a part of the team? I'm going to tell you guys right now, there's no right or wrong answer to this. Every athlete that you would encounter is going to want something different for themselves, and that's okay. And I can tell you that every school out there that is recruiting athletes, all the different colleges out there, all the different programs, depending on the student athlete, they're all going to offer one of these three experiences. So there's schools where these athletes can go out and play right away. There are schools out there where they might have to sit a couple years, and there's schools where they can just be a part of the team and they're not really sure what their 4 years might look like. That's okay. So I think that's a really important question to ask the student athlete and their family. The next question is, which mindset are you? So I want you guys to listen very carefully to me. In this particular moment in the decision-making model, I understand that athletics and academics are both very important. However, one comes before the other in the decision-making model, in my opinion. So is athletics driving your decision, or is academics driving your decision with schools? So I'll give you guys a personal example for me. Okay. I was looking to play baseball and then looking to get an education versus looking to get an education and then play baseball. Two very different mindsets, but with the overarching theme that both are important. I'm just saying one comes a little bit before the other. So for me, when I was getting recruited by Quincy University, they had special education. It was an accredited university, and I can get certified by the state of Illinois. Awesome, great. What does the baseball program look like for me? Because that was a little bit more important at that time. So I really needed to have a good grasp of what the baseball program was offering me. And the flip side of that is, okay, Quincy has a baseball program, great. What does the special education program look like, and what opportunities does that offer me? So I think the student athletes are going to have one or two of those mindsets, and there's no right or wrong answer. The last thing is get an objective assessment about your playing ability from a trusted coach. So obviously, in some of our roles, maybe we are coaches and we can evaluate our student athletes. If we're not in that role, we need to really rely on the coaches that they trust to give them an objective assessment about their playing ability. Okay, and then what I would tell student athletes and families is, when you can answer these 4 questions, please come back and talk to me. And then we can start to evaluate what schools to reach out to. And it's going to help the athlete start to evaluate what schools might be recruiting them already. Okay, so I think those 4 questions are super critical. And I think it's a great way to build a foundation with your student athletes and your families. And I believe that this is more meaningful and dynamic of a conversation than I think what's currently happening in schools across the country. Obviously, I'm only in one particular area, but I just think the conversation needs to be more. And I think this is a great way to start it. So why is the athletic advising piece important? So I'm going to need you guys still to have an open mind and to hear me out how I'm going to break this down. But I'm going to explain to you why I feel the athletic advising is super critical, or I'm going to double down on why I think it is. So I've split up lists into variables versus concrete. I'm going to go with the concrete section first. The concrete stuff, in my opinion, is very predictable. Okay, there's not a whole lot of gray area. So when I say, I'm going to lump the first 3 together: major, academic program, concentration, and classes. So if you have a student going to LSU for business administration, if they take classes X, Y, and Z and pass them throughout their 4 years in the business administration program, do what they need to do, they're going to walk out with a degree. I mean, it's pretty straightforward, right? There's not a whole lot of gray area in that. If you look at the location, so I'll use an example of a school that I worked at. The University of Illinois Chicago is right in the heart of the downtown, and you got that city life, that hustle and bustle about it. UIC isn't changing their location anytime soon. The cost of tuition, within respect to gradual increases in tuition every year, you're not going to see anything jump up like 60 grand in 1 year. The admission standards, you're going to have a very good idea of what a school has in terms of admission standards from the get-go and where that student athlete profiles within that. So there's not a whole lot of gray area in that. The type of college. So I worked at Lewis University up in Romeoville, Illinois, outside of Chicago. It is a private Catholic Lasallian institution. They're not changing their heritage anytime soon. The academic reputation, obviously the easiest example I can provide of that is Harvard University, right? We all have that perception and understand when that university is mentioned, the reputation that comes with it. And then obviously the campus life activities, like I said, I used UIC earlier. It's nestled in the heart of downtown Chicago. It has that city life, that city pace to it. The campus life isn't going to change too drastically. So like I said, those things to me are all concrete and predictable. They are still important in the decision-making process because if you guys notice the bigger theme here is I'm considering all these different things to make a holistic decision, right? A well-rounded decision. So these things to me are just a little more predictable. However, if you go to the left side of my presentation of this page, there's a lot of variables and all of them have to do with athletics. So as far as athletic success goes, a student athlete of yours could be recruited by a school who is at the top of their conference, who's at the top of their division, or who is nationally ranked. Or you could have an athlete who's getting recruited by a school that's at the bottom of their conference, or who is not very good, or doesn't have a great track record of athletic success. So it can vary. The conferences are different, and they're very appealing to student athletes because I think you guys are aware of this, or I hope you would be, is obviously your Power 5 conferences and things like that draw a lot of revenue. And that revenue feeds into athletic facilities. It feeds into resources for student athletes in terms of athletic academic support services. Obviously, some conferences have the appeal to student athletes where if they go into that conference for 4 years, they have more of a shot of being able to play professionally, right? We have it here with LSU and the SEC for one of probably the toughest conferences for football and baseball. And you see there's a high amount of kids that have the opportunity to continue on and play professionally. And that's appealing to some students, athletes. And so the conference matters in terms of the opportunities and the resources they can offer. So the next three I'm going to lump in together: coach's perception, playing time, and scholarship money. You could have a coach that absolutely loves that student athlete, can see him playing right away, and is going to throw a ton of money at him. You could have a coach that thinks the athlete is more developmental, and you can see him contributing down the road for his program, and then maybe gets a little bit of money. And then you could have a coach who not really sure where the athlete fits into his program, but he's really enjoyed the recruiting process with this athlete, really has enjoyed developing a relationship with the athlete and his family and wants to have him on the team. So those are all three different things. Those are all three different scenarios that can be played out for student athletes. One thing I do want to mention about the scholarship money, very important that you guys understand, scholarships are renewed on a yearly basis. I had to go in after my spring season every year and renew my scholarship with my college coach. And most of them are very good about honoring it. I think there's some isolated instances where coaches can lower your money or cut your scholarship. And I'm not saying that happens often, but I've known of isolated instances with teammates of mine who've had buddies at other schools where that has happened to them. So, I mean, as far as I can go from my experience, my coach told me, hey, as long as you work hard, get good grades, and don't get arrested, your scholarship money will stay the same. But then the positive side is if you do really well in your career and you get maybe all region, all conference, all American, coaches can potentially up your scholarship money as well. The other thing that you need to know about athletic scholarships is not every school gets their full allotment of scholarships. So here's what I mean by that. And I'm going to use baseball as a specific example. At the Division I level, each baseball program can get 11.7 scholarships to split. Okay. Division II gets 9.2. That doesn't mean that every D1 and D2 program is getting their full 11.7, their full 9.2. Okay. I can tell you, working at Lewis, none of the sports there are getting their full allotment of scholarships. So that can change things for an athlete and their family from a financial standpoint, and whether they're, changes their ability to maybe attend that school. Off season and practice, obviously at the Division I and II level, the coaches get so many hours a week with these athletes. And then outside of those hours, they have to go to class, maintain their academics, and have somewhat of a social life. So that can be challenging, especially for student athletes who might not be strong in those executive functioning skills with, managing your time, being organized, setting priorities, and all that stuff. But the positive side of that is the opportunities, those hours you get every week with that coach, that's a lot of time for you to get better at your craft, get better at your sport. And that might be important to a student athlete. I can tell you that was very important to me when I was going through my process when figuring out colleges, because when you get to the Division III level, and I don't know exactly what it is, but the amount of time that you're able to spend with a coach and work on stuff is limited compared to Division I, Division II. Rosters. So, I don't know if the areas you guys are in, you see this a lot with your smaller schools. I see it up here in the Chicagoland area a lot with our smaller schools. Is a lot of your small Division II and Division III schools are driving the enrollment through athletics. So here's what I mean by that. You will see 150 kids on a football roster. You will see 70 to 80 kids on baseball, 30 on basketball, because they're trying to drive the enrollment through athletics. And that can be very tough to navigate, because if you think about it, 9 kids play at a time for baseball. There's 22 starting spots in football. And then you would keep in football probably like 70 kids. So if you're adding another 70, what does the 4 years look like for that other 70? That can be really tough. So athletes studying the rosters of smaller schools is very critical. The next question that a student athlete should ask in that scenario is what kind of JV program these colleges run. Some programs run a great JV schedule that gives some of these student athletes, especially the younger ones, an opportunity to compete and develop. So I can give you a couple examples of schools that are up in the Chicagoland area that do a great job of this. My alma mater, Quincy, they have 90 kids on their baseball program. They also run a JV schedule that in a normal year produces 35 to maybe 40 games of JV games for those younger kids, which I think is a great opportunity. North Central College is a powerhouse Division III football team up in the Chicagoland area. They have a 10-game freshman schedule for their freshman and sophomore, which I think is a great opportunity. So as I highlight a couple of schools that do some really good things, there's also schools out there that don't do that great of a JV program. And that is something that, needs to have a discussion with the coach on that. Student athletes' families need to be aware about that. And then we talk about resources. I kind of got into it a little bit, but when you get to your big Division I level schools, and you're going to see a lot of academic support in place for student athletes. You'll see academic advisors, tutoring coordinators, learning specialists, assistant directors, career counselors, mental health counselors. All this different support is in place for student athletes. And then as you kind of go down in the divisions, obviously there may be isolated instances, but when I worked at UIC, we had 5 people on staff for 350 athletes. And then at Lewis, I was one person for 450 athletes and 22 coaches. It's the Division III level. You don't see this as much. And at the NAI and JUCO levels, you might have one person, if that. So those kind of resources really start to shrink as you go down in the divisions. Now, there might be some isolated schools that might have a better situation, but I'm just talking kind of on the norm. That's kind of what that is. And then schedule. Obviously, as you play a higher division, the schedule becomes more intense, more spread out, um, more difficult to handle in terms of having to balance that athletic and academic piece while you're a student athlete. So this is why including the athletic piece in our conversations is so critical. I do want to touch on a point that I've gotten some feedback through my presentation throughout the years of doing this, and I wanted to highlight community colleges, their advantages, disadvantages. So I'm a big fan of community colleges. I think they offer a lot of advantages to student athletes, specifically with the idea that, you know, community colleges obviously can save you money. You can get your gen eds out of the way. It gives you a chance to reinvent yourself academically, possibly. It gives you a chance to start over and hit the refresh button. So I think those things are great. From an athletic standpoint, the rosters turn over every year. And so, you know, your chances of playing time increase. In terms of their development, a lot of the community colleges do a full fall schedule and then they play a pretty packed spring schedule. So to me, it's almost like you get 3 years of development into two. And then the other nice thing with community colleges, if you have a student athlete that goes to community college and is really successful at that level, typically what I've seen, you get a lot of Division II and Division I interests, and you know, those coaches are giving what I call impact scholarship money to those athletes because they see them as guys that can come right in and play for them and kind of be an anchor to their program. I especially have seen this with baseball in terms of guys who've gone to the community college route who have been really successful, whether they're a position player or pitcher, and then they're getting what I would call impact scholarship money to be a weekend starter or be a middle of the order type hitter, because college coaches see them as physically more ready, you know, mentally tougher. They've faced 2 years of college pitching, so they have high expectations for them coming in. So I think those are advantages to that. I think you want to look at community colleges. Student athletes should look at community colleges with a proven track record or a history of moving on players to four-year schools. I think that's really important as well. And then obviously there's a risk reward to everything, right? So obviously the risk going to community colleges, if you go there for 2 years and maybe you don't do as well as you thought, then that's going to kind of limit some of your recruiting as far as where you can move on to that four-year school. So that can happen. But the way I look at it is if that does happen, you can still catch on with a smaller school, maybe a Division III, but then you just save 2 years on college. So I think, you know, while that is a setback in some cases, I still think you can come out on top, and you can still come out on top in how you look at it. So I hope you guys understood, or you could see where I was coming from with the variable and concrete stuff. I just think that this is so critical. You know, this athletic piece is so critical in our conversations. Here's my last slide, and then I'll share my contact info, right? So what are things we can do with student athletes and their families to help them, right? Because you might have a student athlete who initially didn't want to play sports in college, but then all of a sudden comes to you and he's like, hey, I want to play, or I haven't got much interest. What can I do, right? So some of the biggest things I want to highlight is obviously support with emailing and calling coaches. You can help student athletes, you know, develop an email to a college coach. You can, you know, maybe help them figure out with what questions to ask a college coach. I think that's really big. I think college coaches want to hear from student athletes and be able to develop a personal relationship with them. I think it goes a long way. I remember July 1st going into my senior year in the fall. So that summer going into my senior, I really hit the ground running with calling college coaches. And I actually had one drive up 8 hours to watch me in a showcase just because of how I conducted myself on the phone. So I think that goes a long way with them. Obviously sending video, you know, so football and basketball has a little easier because I think a lot of schools go through Huddle where they have their film or their tape already ready to go, but encouraging student athletes to create a video of their skill sets, of their strengths to show off to college coaches, I think is a great thing. I created a video for myself. Filling out recruiting questionnaires is critical. That's a great way to jumpstart the process. Each college's athletic page or website specific by sport is going to have a link to a recruiting questionnaire. So that's where you fill out all your contact information, put all your academic, athletic information, contact numbers. That's a great way to start the recruiting process. I would encourage students to examine rosters and successes of the program, understanding the timeline of recruiting of each sport. So here's what I'm going to get into, and this is something that I recently learned that I think is really great. So I read an article the other day. It was actually really well laid out, and it talks about student athletes all have different timelines for recruiting. So this article is saying that athletes usually fall into 3 different timelines. You have your athlete who is a top player in their grade level, who's doing exceptional things within their sport on a national level at a very young age, freshman or sophomore, and that's when you see your freshmen, sophomores verbally committing to schools at such a young age. And I'm sure you guys in your circles have seen it. You have maybe a stud sophomore at your high school or whatever circle you're in who's already committed to a big Division I university. So that is one timeline for an athlete. The other timeline is your typical athlete that is going to have the recruiting start to kick up just after their junior season, and that summer going into the fall of their senior year. That is where most typical athletes fall in terms of when their recruiting takes off. That happened to me as well. All my interest and the seriousness of playing college baseball really picked up over that summer for me. And then you have your third athlete who is that late bloomer who doesn't really get a whole lot of interest throughout high school, but all of a sudden he spurts up, he puts on muscle, or he grows, and all of a sudden he has a huge senior year. And now schools are talking to him and wanting him. And then that recruiting process happened very late, probably in the spring of their senior year out into the summer of their senior year, right before school starts in the fall. So just something for you guys to be aware of. I thought that was really interesting, and I thought it made a lot of sense. In your encounter with student athletes, you're probably going to run into student athletes that fall into all 3 of those different timelines. And it's okay. It's okay, whichever timeline they fall into. And then the last thing, student athletes have to see themselves outside of sports at the college or university, and this happens during the visit. So God forbid if a student athlete gets injured, quits the team, something happens, really important that they enjoy the university and what it has to offer outside of their sport. And that really has to happen during the visit. I can tell you in my visit with Quincy, I absolutely fell in love with it. It was a very small school. That is what I needed. So that worked out really well for me. So with that being said, here's my contact information. You guys can feel free to email me, call me if you want. I'm really passionate about this. I hope you guys found this beneficial. Like I said, I've presented this at numerous high schools in the Chicagoland area. I've done this state, regional, national level. Hope you guys found this beneficial. Hope you guys took something unique away from this. And if you guys are interested in collaborating, with the situation you guys might be in, or who you guys represent, or who you guys work with, I'd be more than happy to touch base with you. And then at this time, I'll go into the chat and see if there's any questions and I can answer them. Once again, though, thank you guys for taking the time to listen to me. And like I said, I hope you found it beneficial.
I am going to post a link to a survey if you guys would be so kind to fill it out for us really quick. And then Anthony, I'm going to mute myself again and you can field questions as well.
Yeah, let's see here. Elizabeth, so you asked, I work at a university, would like to improve our recruitment pitch when we meet with potential student and their parents. Have you received any feedback? Let's see here. Yeah, so Elizabeth, to answer your question, so I actually used to have meetings with recruits when I was at Lewis. So I would sit down, not every coach utilized my role, but men's volleyball, I met with every single recruit and family And I think what they appreciated the most was letting them know the in-depths of my services and my role and how that impacts their son or daughter, specifically from an academic, career, social, emotional standpoint. And then I actually took it back to a high school level a little bit and went through their NCAA high school portal and talked about those core classes and gave them a quick overview of core classes and how many years you need to take and do all that stuff, kind of what I highlighted at the beginning of my presentation. And then I would go over, different eligibility scenarios for continuing eligibility. So I covered, because of my background in high school, I covered the high school side of things. And then I also covered the continuing eligibility stuff. And you might do that already. But when I would meet with my volleyball recruits, the parents and the coaches thought that was really beneficial or extremely helpful. Outside of that, in my current work with my travel organization, I haven't heard of anything as far as like the feedback or what was covered or what was helpful. I hope that answers your question, or I hope that provides some insight to you on maybe how you guys could improve your recruitment pitch. But I hope that helps. Yeah, like I said, if anybody would like a copy, reach out to me via email. I'll send it to you guys. But thank you for your time. Any other questions I can answer?
All right, Anthony, any other questions or comments or anything from anybody? You guys all good? Well, thank you all very much for attending. I hope you enjoyed the rest of the summit. And Anthony, thanks again for everything from today.
Yeah, thank you guys. I appreciate it.